This is the latest version of Rocky Mountain Slayer, the long-standing freeride machine with Chameleon-Like adjustability that allows use of multiple wheel sizes and a range of travel options from 170 to 200 millimeters. The C70 29er model I have here for review has a carbon front triangle and an aluminum rear end, coupled together with the Ride 4 linkage for a nice range of adjustability in both geometry and suspension progression, so you can fine-tune it to your riding style and preferences. With its 29-inch wheels and 170 millimeters of travel, this particular setup finds itself in what many would categorize as the enduro range of bikes. Yet it's quite different from many others in its class, and after spending some time riding it, I've come to understand why Rocky Mountain has described this bike as Big Mountain. This same bike can also be set up with 27.5-inch wheels, and there's even an all-alloy Bike Park edition equipped with a 200mm dual crown RockShox boxer. Lately, I've really started to redefine what it is that I most look for in a mountain bike. I'm fortunate because I get to ride lots of different brands and models, and the more of them I ride, the more my list of personal likes and dislikes defines itself. As riders, we cover a wide range of riding styles and terrain. We want what offers that special blend of characteristics which defines the perfect bike to each of us. So reviewing them requires the ability to be objective, because it's important to convey a bike's strengths and weaknesses without putting too much personal bias into the mix.
Ready now.
Ready.
This bike, however, just so happens to check off tons of boxes when it comes to what gets me really stoked to ride. Before we get into the specs and ride impressions of the bike, I want to thank N+1 for getting this very model in my hands so I can review it for all of you. Now, they support this channel, and from now until the end of February, you can get 25% off all Rocky Mountain bicycles using code ROCKYSENDY25 on their website. You can also just give them a call and let them know you saw this video. Now, I'll leave all the details for that offer, as well as other great deals, in the description below. All right, well, now that I've gotten this bike all built up, let's take a look at the specs and everything that comes along for the ride. This C70 retails at $7,100 US, and it's the top level build for this particular model. It's equipped with a Shimano XT drivetrain, Shimano XT 4-piston brakes, Fox 38 Elite with Grip 2, a Fox DH X2 coil, a WTB Volt Race saddle with a super slick Jason inspired Slayer logo. Now this is sitting on top of a Raceface Turbine R dropper, which by the way is made by Fox, who owns the Raceface brand. The cockpit is tied together with a FSA Orbit headset, Rocky Mountain 35 AM stem, and an AM 780 bar with ODI Elite Pro lock-on grips, which are some of my favorite grips out there. Now all of this is rolling on Raceface AR30 rims with a Trace rear hub, and it's wrapped up with a Maxxis DHR2 on the rear and an Assegai on the front, both in double down casings. Yeah, it's not an inexpensive bike, but this entire package comes together for top level performance without going overboard. There's another carbon model just below it at $5,600 US, and there's a starting alloy option at $3,700 US. Now, I think they did a great job with the spec on each tier, and there's a solid value to be found with any option you land on. So let's hop into the performance of this bike. The suspension is quite plush off the top, and there's an aggressively progressive leverage curve, which offers more and more support as you dive into the travel. I felt this was really at the heart of what this bike was all about. After trying out all of the Ride 4 positions, I settled on position number 3, which they call neutral. Now this put the head tube angle at 63.8 degrees, the reach at 467, and the rear center at 442 with a wheelbase of 1,261 millimeters. Even though I tend to prefer a slightly less slack bike, this position just felt well balanced for my style. On the ground, the Slayer is slack enough to charge into the steeps and tech with control and confidence, but not so long and slack that it becomes notably sluggish in tight corners and slower technical maneuvers. Now, I had some concerns about the stack height being higher than what I tend to prefer, but I felt surprisingly centered on the bike in every scenario I threw at it. I was surprised at how fast I adapted to the bike. I didn't have to spend much time at all getting comfortable on it before I was willing to push it on harder trails and features. In the air, this bike caught me a bit off guard, offering a lot more pop than I had anticipated. Fortunately, it's equally balanced off the ground, and able to maintain composure, which was really handy when I overshot a few landers early on. Now, I quickly adjusted, and jumping on this bike really felt effortless. This thing loves to get off the ground, and it's got this ability to go big and control harder landings, which gave me some added confidence, and I was able to finally clear a couple of features that previously I've been shying away from. I recently decided to sell my downhill bike, and I've been looking for something to take its place for park and shuttle duty. Now, I'm no longer racing, and to be honest, a full-on downhill rig just feels like more than what I need these days. I spent the entire summer park season riding the Ibis Ritmo while I was doing this long-term review on that bike, and I had a lot of fun taking advantage of its lighter and more lively nature. While that 150-ish travel bike tackled everything in spades, including the bigger road gaps I'm familiar with, I'd prefer a little more cushion on reserve when approaching big features that are new to me. Many of the bikes in that 170 to 180 mil range these days are pretty race focused, and while they feel incredible when being pushed hard at speed, they tend to be less enjoyable when you're not riding them fully pinned. Now, the Slayer is a bike that can still be pushed hard, and though it sacrifices a bit of stability at speed compared to some of its enduro-focused counterparts, it pays off in spades when it comes to high-flying fun. It can tackle the biggest terrain you can throw at it, absorbing hard impacts while still managing to be plush and comfortable on the trail in between. I really love this bike. However, there's one complaint I have, which actually came from the Fox DHX2. Now, this shock recently saw a redesign with the retention collar for the coil. Previous generations had this C-style collar, which allowed it to be removed perpendicularly from the shock. The new design actually uses this retention clip to hold the collar in place, and it requires sliding it directly off the back of the body over the shock mounts. The Slayer uses roller bearing mounts, and this interferes with the collar, preventing it from being removed without first uninstalling the hardware. That makes swapping out the coil for a different spring rate not as straightforward as I would like. This isn't a complaint with Rocky Mountain, and this design is going to equally affect other brands and models out there that use similar hardware. I'm sure Fox had their reasoning in this change, but in my opinion, it's not a very consumer-friendly decision. If you're purchasing this bike, I'd suggest going through a retailer who will be willing to swap out the coil for you should you need a different spring rate than what comes stock. The folks at N+1 are able to make this change and help you select the correct coil size, so this won't be an issue for you. Next up for review is this 160/170 nuke-proof Mega, which is fresh to US distribution and new to N+1 bikes. It just arrived in my hands here yesterday, and I'm excited to see how this one stacks up to the Slayer. Now it's time for me to get this Mega all set up and the suspension dialed in using my tips and tricks that you can use for yourself in this playlist here. And if you want to see the review on this nuke proof in a few weeks, you can subscribe there and turn on the bell for all future notifications. Now I'll see you all in the next video, but until then, I hope to see you out on the trail.